Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending upon where you're at. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I welcome you on behalf of our leadership team, former Congressman Mel Levine, Xavier Oslovsky, and myself. Today is Purim, and we wish you a festive and happy Purim. Welcome and thank you to today's guest, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Mr. Prime Minister, we really appreciate you appearing on America at a Crossroads to give us your perspective on the current crisis in Israel, and appreciate you staying up late for us. I know it's 10 p.m. in Israel, and most of us couldn't be coherent at that hour, so we're so glad that you are confident that you are. We really appreciate it. Welcome and thank you as well to our moderator, Larry Mantle, and thank you to our dedicated audience who stopped your usual Sunday activities. It's a tough time to garner a crowd like we have, so we really appreciate you being with us to receive this important information during this hour. Just a quick reminder, this week we have two more programs. On Wednesday, March 27th at 5 p.m., we will mark the 4th anniversary and the 200th program of America at a Crossroads. We will welcome Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post. Jennifer was our very first America at a Crossroads guest, and she has joined us each year on our program's anniversary for a program entitled America, Then, Now, and Where Are We Headed? And our moderator will be Warren Olney. And then on this Thursday, so it's basically 3 programs this week. Sorry about that, but that's the way the timing worked out. We will again host Ambassador Dennis Ross for our 10th Israel and Crisis briefing with Larry Mantle as our host. We appreciate you sharing our emails with your friends and emailing me if you have friends or family whom you'd like to have added to our growing list. Everyone is welcome. And remember, each of our programs is available on YouTube, on our website, and via podcast. So if you like what you will hear tonight, you can share the program as widely as you'd like. Now to introduce our guest and moderator, please welcome my friend, colleague, and a vital member of this series, leadership of this series, former Congressman Mel Levine. Mel?
Hi, Janice. Thank you very much. It is a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to introduce my longtime friend, Ehud Olmert. I first met Ehud and his wonderful wife, Eliza, sometime in the 1970s. I can't exactly pin down the date. But even then, some 40 or more years ago, Ehud was a very down-to-earth person, but he was already a rising star in Israeli politics. He began his tenure in the Knesset at the age of 28. He has served as Minister of Health, and he was the mayor of Jerusalem for 10 years. He returned to the Knesset in 2003 after serving as mayor, and subsequently served as Deputy Prime Minister, Acting Prime Minister, and then as the Prime Minister. Over the years, he has been an independent and insightful voice on Israel's most challenging and important issues, and today is no exception. Coincidentally, this morning, I happened to be listening to Fareed Zakaria, who reminded his audience that the parties in the region came close to a 2-state solution when Ehud Olmert was prime minister. I asked Ehud to join us today to discuss the current situation relating to the war between Israel and Gaza and all of its ramifications. Ehud will be interviewed, as Janice mentioned, by the highly talented Larry Mantle, who last was working with our guest for our audience 4 or 5 days ago. Larry has been Mr. Air Talk in Los Angeles since 1985. He has been the spokesman for this highly acclaimed program, which is the longest running daily talk show in Southern California. He is a fixture to people who live in Southern California. Larry, the floor is yours.
Mel, thank you very much, Janice and Zev. It's so good to be back so soon after our program last Wednesday that you just mentioned. And impressive, this is the first of 3 programs this week from America at a Crossroads. So good to be with you to not only talk about the very latest developments in the Middle East, but to have with us someone who has been so centrally involved with issues in Israel and dealing with international leaders for such an extended period. Mr. Prime Minister, we appreciate you being with us today for America to Crossroads. Let me just start with multiple reports that the talks in Doha, Qatar, continue, with the U.S. and Israel reportedly agreeing on the number of Palestinian prisoners to be released for every hostage held by Hamas. We don't have a Hamas response yet. A 6-week ceasefire has been proposed with humanitarian assistance for Palestinians in Gaza. What do you think the prospects are for these talks in Doha to yield something fruitful?
It's very hard to say. I don't really know the contact that there may be between the brokers, the Qataris and the Americans, with the Hamas leaders is very indirect. It's not that they are just lifting the smartphone, dialing a number, and getting Ehud Olmert in the tunnel somewhere in Gaza. It's a very complex process. So I don't think that, I'm not certain they know. What I want to say is this. My personal judgment is that we will have to give much more than we want to give in order to get back the hostages. Question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is the top priority of Israel at this point? And my personal feeling, and I just express my own personal opinion, I don't speak for anyone in Israel. I guess I reflect the opinion of many, but I'm not in a formal position. I'm not a spokesman of any political body. I'm not a member of any particular party. So I just express my own personal opinion. I think that bringing back the hostages at the present time is the most important, the most crucial, the most significant thing that we can achieve. And everything else has to be subject to this. The problem that we have now in the negotiating process is that when the present government of Israel, the present prime minister, says we are not prepared to exchange 30, 40 or 50 of the Hamas prisoners for one Israeli hostage. That sounds very reasonable and very acceptable to the common person and to what we believe are the reasonable standards. Problem is that he says it to Ehud Olmert, and he released Ehud Olmert in 2011, together with more than 1,000 Palestinian Hamas murderers for one Israeli soldier. So when the same prime minister, say to the same person that he released in exchange, for more than 1,000 prisoners for one person, that he is not prepared to bargain 40 or 50 prisoners for one Israeli, that is not a very convincing argument in the context of what each knows about the other.
Let's go back to the decision you had to make. You refused the Hamas demand to release women and minor Palestinians in exchange for IDF soldier Gilad Shalit, who'd been abducted by Hamas. How is this circumstance different from the one that you had to deal with?
I turned down, that's right. I turned down all the proposals that were in the area of, let's say, a few hundred Palestinians for one Israeli soldier, and I made it clear that none of the prisoners that potentially can be released by us will not be a murderer with blood on his hands. And I turned down all the proposals, and at the end it broke down. Now, there is a dramatic difference between then and now. Gilad Shalit was an Israeli soldier. When we send our soldiers to the battlefield, it is a premise which is accepted by everyone that the soldiers can be wounded, can, God forbid, be killed, can be abducted by the other side, and then they will be prisoners, and you will have to somehow deal and try and bring them out. Not at any cost, not at any price. On this particular case that we are facing now, the Israeli hostages which were abducted by the Palestinians were deserted by us. We, the state of Israel, the Israeli army, the Israeli government, prime minister, and everyone down the line, we left them without defense. We have violated the most fundamental commitment that a country has to its citizens. And therefore, we are obliged to do everything before anything else to bring them back home. And if we will not do that, because of the possible perception of not achieving our commitments to eradicate and destroy completely the Hamas and so on and so forth, all kinds of simplistic and somehow, I think, shallow statements made by the Prime Minister. I think that this is something that will never be forgiven.
Well, so and there's no guarantee that Hamas
Larry,
there's no guarantee that Hamas would agree to the release of all of the Israeli hostages, even if Israel were to agree to totally withdraw militarily and allow Hamas to continue in control. But under what terms would you accept in exchange for the release of the hostages? Would you put any conditions on whatsoever?
I think that you know, my assessment is perhaps somewhat different. I think that if Israel will stop the fighting at this point now, which I think we should anyway, and if we will decide that we'll make a commitment, and this will have to be worked out, you know, the logistic of it will have to be worked out, and I think it can, that we will pull out back into the line where from we started the military operation in exchange for getting back all the hostages. I think that it is worthwhile for the Hamas to want to get it. And therefore, there is a good chance that within this framework, it can be achieved.
How would this keep Israelis safe in the future, though, if Hamas continues to control Gaza and would understandably want to rebuild its network of tunnels that have been partially destroyed by IDF aerial attacks? Then what's to keep Hamas from being emboldened for future attacks on Israelis?
I want to say two things. First of all, if you will allow me just to make a comparison for a short instant to what happened at the Second Lebanese War and the end of the Second Lebanese War. I remember that when we had that resolution of the United Nations Security Council 1701, a resolution which was drafted by me and by Condoleezza Rice, at that time the Secretary of State, word by word and sentence by sentence, when this was achieved, everyone said, how can we guarantee that the Hezbollah will not shoot again and it will not be emboldened to take over and so on and so forth. In reality, we got 17 years, which were completely quiet, with not one bullet shot across the border from Lebanon to the state of Israel. So things which are not necessarily being seen at the beginning have dynamics of their own. And the same I want to say about Gaza. Number one, we destroyed most of the military capacity of Hamas. We destroyed the bunkers, we destroyed the tunnels, not just by aerial attacks, by ground forces, by the Israeli armory, by the Israeli infantry. We killed more than 10,000 of the Hamas fighters. Hamas is in an entirely different situation right now than what it was a couple of months ago, a few months ago. Hamas is not now in a position to endanger the security of the state of Israel to start with. Now, I don't want to suggest, and I will never say, that we are safe under any circumstance. No. But I think that if we will accept the paradigm of the 7th of October as the basis to analyze what may happen in the future, I think we will give Hamas the greatest victory that they have never anticipated. What happened on the 7th of October is that we were not there. There was not Israeli army. There were not fighters. There were not defenders. We were away for reasons which will have to be inquired and will be inquired one day. But to take this specific circumstance as a paradigm upon which to judge the ability of the state of Israel to defend itself against a terrorist organization that has no planes, that has no tanks, that has no armory, that had no mortar shells that can, has the kind of impact that our weapons have, I think is ridiculous. We failed because of negligence, because of arrogance, and because of overconfidence, and we didn't do the basic fundamental obligation that we had to, which is to be there in order to defend ourselves. Now to assume that from now on forever, we are unable to defend ourselves against a possible threat of Hamas at some time in the future, it will take years before Hamas can recuperate from the terrible blow that they suffered by the military operation of Israel. It will take them years to rebuild the tunnels if they will be given the opportunity. Therefore, I think the bottom line is that we can afford ourselves. Now, after doing what we did, after killing so many of their fighters, after destroying the bunkers and their command position and the launchers and their weapons, they don't shoot rockets now for a couple of months already.
What about Rafa? President Biden has said that there's a red line that would be crossed if Prime Minister Netanyahu orders a siege of Rafa without the ability of people to evacuate and without significant food and water for the people that are there where civilians are suffering. Do you think there are any circumstances that justify a military attack on Rafa now?
I think that considering all the circumstances that I've outlined to you before, that there is not any important, urgent need to invade Rafa. The possible consequence of entering Gaza is not worth the cost. The cost in terms of the losing, first of all, the support of the international community, the cost of the possible non-involved civilians that will suffer from the Israeli military operation. The Israeli counteroffensive from the beginning was just unavoidable, and it was clear that we have to take severe measures. It also was quite clear that there may be a lot of non-involved civilians that will suffer, that will be victims of this military operation. I think that at this point now, we have reached the point where additional victims, non-involved civilians victims, are not worth the achievements that we can get from this operation. And therefore, there comes a time where you have to say up to here. And I entirely subscribe to the judgment made by President Biden. I think there is no question about Biden's commitment to the state of Israel, to the security of the state of Israel. When he says to us, hey guys, hold it, you're exaggerating. You know, the perception in the international community of what happens here, unfortunately, unfair to us in many different ways, but still is that, hey, they killed 1,500, 2,000 Israeli civilians. How many tens of thousands of civilians, Palestinian civilians, were initially uninvolved in terror, were killed by your counter operation? Now, I think that this is not a fair way to judge what happened, because we were attacked. Our civilians were the target of operation. We don't target their civilians. They are collateral victims of our response to the terror of the Hamas and the Palestinians. But still, when someone looks at it from a distance, without the emotional involvement that we obviously have, then he thinks that we are committing terrible crimes. And the question is now, how much more do we want to suffer from the possible ramifications of these reactions of the international community for what we can achieve by invading Rafa? I'm not certain that it's worth it.
Let's talk about the three-member war cabinet with Benny Gantz of the National Unity Party and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. What is your understanding of their input and the degree to which they're in agreement or not with the Prime Minister's military plans here?
You asked me to become a political commentator, which I'm not sure I'm qualified to start with. And I'm not sure I want to. So I'll say it briefly. I think Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot are outstanding guys. I know them. They used to report to me when I was Prime Minister, and there were generals in the General Staff of Israel. Both Benny, who became Chief of Staff, and subsequently Gadi, who became Chief of Staff. They are decent, they are honest, they are experienced, they are courageous, they are great fighters. Had they asked me, which they didn't, unfortunately, I would have told them, listen, stay outside of the cabinet and give every possible advice that the Prime Minister or the war cabinet will want to hear from you. But don't be part of the responsibility for decisions which are not always made with the real interest of the state of Israel in mind of those who take these decisions. And so they probably had a certain degree of influence there, but the way it is run by the Prime Minister, I think does not justify the continued participation of Gantz and Eisenkot in the cabinet, according to my point.
How do you square this difference in Israeli public opinion, where there seems to be widespread support, for the most part, for the execution of the war in Gaza, but tremendous criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu? There have been continuing protests against him as You know, a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. Global Intelligence Assessment was that Netanyahu's getting an even looser grip on power as Israeli public opinion turns further against him. So how, given this difference of opinion about the war versus the prime minister himself, how do you see this playing out?
Number one, I think that they, by and large, most of the Israelis feel their emotions are very strong, that we should have reacted from the outset to these terrible atrocities committed by the Palestinians, and therefore the war is unavoidable, and it has to be carried out. Question is, how far should we go? How more shall we continue with this? This is a different question, but the general initial reaction of the Israelis, all of the Israelis, all of us, was, hey, we have to reach out for every one of them and kill them, because what they did is something that will never be forgiven, will never be forgotten, and we can't acquiesce with what we have seen. We have to react. But then all kinds of issues arise, and we have to think about the broader possible ramifications. What is the reaction of the international community? What is the political horizon which is offered or not offered by the Israeli government for the next stage? Okay, let's assume that we are completely successful in destroying Hamas, okay, which I think to a large degree we did. I don't know what is the absolute complete destruction. I don't know. Perhaps the prime minister will once explain it to his constituents. I don't know, but we have done a great deal. Okay, let's assume that we will achieve even what Netanyahu promises, which I doubt that we can. And there will be not one single Hamas person left alive. Then what? Are there not still 6 million Palestinians? What are we going to do with them? Are we going to continue occupation forever? Are we going to continue to control the West Bank and Gaza indefinitely? What is the political horizon which the government of Israel offers? The lack of the political horizon, the lack of any will, any desire to even discuss it, is the source of great concern for many of the greatest supporters of the state of Israel, including first and foremost President Biden.
What would you do if you were, Ehud, if you were prime minister and you called a halt to the military action in Gaza? Obviously, massive reconstruction is going to have to take place after a humanitarian effort to provide food and water to the populace that's been displaced and injured. So who then runs Gaza? What entity would it be, and to what extent would Israel control that process if you were making the decision?
First of all, I don't think that we have to remain in Gaza. We don't have to remain in Gaza. Gaza is not part of Israel. Gaza is not Israeli. Gaza was a basis of aggression and of terror against Israel, and we had to react, and we, I think, did something which was, as I said, inevitable and just. And we destroyed Hamas first and foremost. It's true, unfortunately, that part of what we did was also causing a terrible damage to Gaza. Now it has to be rebuilt. I think that it has to be rebuilt by Palestinians. Of course, Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas has to be removed completely, and I think it's been removed already to a large degree and will have to be removed further. And this is something that will have to be accomplished in coordination with international force that will take over Gaza for an interim period of a year and a half, until the Palestinians, together with other moderate Arab countries, will build the security forces which will be able to control Gaza and to help rebuild Gaza. So for a period of time, we did something similar in Lebanon in 2006. In this resolution 1701, which I mentioned before, there was also the UNIFIL force, the military force authorized by the UN Security Council, which was brought over to the south of Lebanon. 15,000 of them, 12,000 of them were brought over to the south of Lebanon, including soldiers from European countries, mostly from European countries in the beginning. And they helped change the balance within south of Lebanon that created this entirely different military and political situation for so many years. As I said again, no fighting, no shooting, no skirmishes, no attacks, nothing for 17.
But would there be an appetite for international forces to do that now? I mean, IDF estimates 5,000 to 8,000 Hamas soldiers are still in Rafa. The belief is that there are a number of the Hamas top military officials that have survived Israel's military action to this point. And there continues to be tremendous support in Gaza for Hamas. So what's to keep Hamas from reconstituting itself, which therefore discourages international forces from going in and ensuring the kind of peace that you talked about in territory that had been controlled by Hezbollah to the north? I'm not quite understanding how this would be comparable.
Look, again, I'm not sure that all the figures and all the numbers that are spread all over the time are necessarily accurate. What I hear is that there are 6 regiments left for the entire Hamas military force. This is not something that can be dealt with. It will have to be dealt with. And right now, what we need to do is to bring back the hostages. This is the first priority, the most important one, that must be achieved. And if the cost of bringing back the hostages is stopping the military operation and possibly leaving a certain number of regiments, yet untouched by Israel or not yet completely destroyed, then this is worth the possible return of the hostages, all of the hostages, which, as I've said, is the first and most important priority that we have. Then we'll have to deal. We'll have to deal with what will remain of Hamas. As I said, I think, first of all, that there should be an international intervention force of European soldiers that will take over Gaza for an interim period of a year and a half, in order to complete what the Israeli military operation did, which is to remove what remains of Hamas completely from the area. And this is something that can be done. Subsequently, there will be the Palestinians and moderate Arab forces that will take their place and will step in instead of them. Now, nothing is ideal in life, and nothing is ideal in the Middle East. And everyone who comes to you and says, listen, I promise it will be this and that, completely will remove everything, will destroy everything, we will they will remove them from under the face of the sun and so on and so forth. I'm familiar with this rhetoric. The Middle East has seen and heard these words and these promises for many years. Let's be more realistic. Let's be more constrained. Let's be more careful. And let's not forget that the broader picture, and this is the importance of the international community to the well-being of the state of Israel the importance of the continued support of the United States of America to the state of Israel. We are losing the public opinion in America. We are losing the public opinion in Europe. This can be a much more dangerous threat to the security of the state of Israel than destroying a couple more of the Hamas regiments, which are not yet destroyed.
Ehud, let's step back and talk about the potential for a two-state solution, Israel and Palestinians side by side. This is something that you obviously are devoted to and believe in, but we've seen polling among Israelis shift pretty dramatically away from two-state answer here. And what would you say, or do you say, to Israelis about your sense of where a two-state solution would take Israel and the need for it?
You know, what appears to be the popular opinion in Israel now, following all the dramatic events which we went through in the last half a year, is very is expected. I don't expect any other reaction at the first stage. So in the long run, I think we have to ask ourselves, and this is what I was trying to raise before when we talked. I said, okay, let's assume that we destroyed all the Hamas, all the Islamic Jihad. We killed not just 12,000 of the fighters, but 20,000 of the fighters. None remains, okay? There are still 6 million Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. What is the political horizon that we have? What is the political horizon that we offer? So I think that this is something, it first and foremost will require a determined leadership on our side and on their side, that will have the courage and the guts to move forward and to do what may appear to be not quite popular enough in the public opinion of Israel at a certain junction, but that will prove to be inevitable on the long run. I will remind you of one great leader of Israel that I had the honor of working for, and this is Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin promised, before he became prime minister, that he will annex all the territories, and that when he will retire, he will move to live in one of the settlements in Sinai, which of course will remain under the complete Israeli control forever. And had someone polled the opinions of Israelis at that time, probably they would have said that they are in favor of holding all of the territories. Particularly, by the way, after the 73 war, because after the 73 war in which we lost so many thousands of Israeli fighters, and the war ended by a total Israeli control across of the Suez Canal on the way to Cairo, had you asked then someone, would you pull out from the territories? He will say, are you crazy? Why did we fight for? If not to make sure that they will not have this opportunity ever again to attack us and to threaten to cross the Sinai and to come back into the Israel.
So you're saying that this public opinion is hardly fixed.
What did Menachem Begin do? Together with General Dayan and Ezra Weizmann and the Attorney General Aaron Barak at that time, they decided to pull out from every single centimeter of Sinai and of Sharm el-Sheikh back into the 67 borders. And thank God we have peace with Egypt for 40 years, more than 40 years, which is one of the most important strategic achievements in the history of the state of Israel. Thank God Egypt is on our side now, rather than on the other side. So when you ask me, how will I convince the Israelis? It will be very difficult to convince them, of course. But at the end of the day, what alternative do we have? What alternative do we have? Do we want to continue to be occupiers of so many millions of the Palestinians? Can we really tolerate from a moral point of view that 6 million Palestinians will not have the freedom of speech, will not have the freedom of movement, will not be allowed to vote for parliament, will not be allowed to exercise their right for self-determination, and that we will be perceived and seen across the world as occupiers forever? Is this going to do any good to the state of Israel?
Let me ask some of our viewer questions. We have so many good ones, so if we could answer those just as briefly as possible. Carol asks, do you believe the number that Hamas says have been killed by the IDF in Gaza?
No, I don't believe anything that Hamas says. So I don't know to say. I have no
including the
information.
Ministry of Health. Do you see them as essentially corrupted by the government of Hamas?
Ministry of Health of Hamas is not a Ministry of Health of a normal state with recognized institutions which can be trusted. I don't trust them. But let me ask Carol. And if we didn't kill 20,000, if we only killed 10,000 non-involved, if only 5,000 were killed, which are non-involved, I'm not here to apologize and to say that we shouldn't have started on the first place. I said very clearly from the beginning, we had to react. The counteroffensive of the state of Israel was inevitable. We had to reach out for the Hamas and kill as many as we could. But we can't ignore the ramifications of what happened. And even if only 5,000 and not 20,000 were killed, there are 5,000 innocent civilians. If they were killed, this is heartbreaking. And we have to recognize it and not to continue with these arrogant reactions which characterize the Israeli prime minister and his bunch of supporters.
Elliot asks, how soon could a new election take place and how would that happen?
I hope that it can take place within 3 months from the minute that you declare election. So it's the 3 months is the requirement of the Israeli law. What will happen? I doubt that it will happen as a result of just a regular political maneuvering. It will be a result. You know what volcano eruption is, right? I'm sure you know. Happens sometimes, a typhoon. We are very close inside Israel to a volcano eruption. When it will happen, the people, the street, the emotional reaction of hundreds of thousands and millions of Israelis that are just sick and tired of the manipulations of the government will force the government to retire and to go to early elections. And I'm sure that it will happen sooner than most people think.
So would the first step be that the coalition around the prime minister would collapse under that kind of public pressure?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I think so.
A number of viewers, including Paul, are asking, and we took part of this, what it would take for Israel to agree to the creation of a Palestinian state, but also asked, what would it take for Palestinians to agree to 2 states side by side?
Look, one thing I must emphasize time and again, because I've been talking about it a lot. I am not an advocate for the Palestinians. Palestinians and Mahmoud Abbas, their leader, are our enemies. They don't like us. They have made every possible mistake. They were responsible for terror for many years that affected our lives, and I'm talking the former mayor of Jerusalem. They had to go day in and day out to a suicidal attack location where tens and hundreds of Israelis lost their lives in the most brutal manner. Okay, they are our enemies. The question is, how can we change the tide? How can we change the balance that we have between us and them in order to create an entirely different reality? Now, I have proposed, the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is one thing characterizes and I think distinguishes him from all of the others. From day one, he was against terror. And even in the worst days of the Intifada, he spelled it out in the most explicit and public manner that he is against terror. Okay? So I negotiated with him. And I met with him hundreds of hours. And at the end of the day, I presented him with a peace plan, comprehensive peace plan, on the basis of a two-state solution. And the Palestinian state, more or less on the borders identical to the 67 borders, with minor modifications on both sides. We will annex some territories and we will swap with them some territories, so that the size of the Palestinian state will be more or less the 67 borders. I proposed that the Arab side of Jerusalem will be the Palestinian capital, something that has never been offered in the history of the conflict. I also proposed that the Holy Basin in Jerusalem will not be under, including the Temple Mount, will not be under the sole political sovereignty of either Israel or the Palestinians. There will be a trust of 5 nations, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, and America, under the auspices of the UN Security Council, which will administer the holy places so that it will be quiet and relaxed rather than a burning place that can explode and destroy the balance of the entire region. And also that the refugee issues will be dealt with within the framework of the Arab League Peace Initiative. I presented it to Abu Mazen. I say to him, I do it on behalf of the State of Israel as the Prime Minister, at a time that I had an absolute majority in parliament in support of my position. And I told him, sign, let's sign now and go to the UN and change history. He never came back to me. He never said no, but he never said yes. So your question is very adequate. What will it take to make the Palestinians courageous and determined and committed for this solution? I don't know to speak for the Palestinians. I think that we have to do everything that we can in our power to bring forth a dialogue on that basis, and to hope that with the assistance of all the Arab moderate countries and the United States and the other international powers, we'll be able to force the Palestinians to come along and make an agreement.
And even if public sentiment, both among Palestinians and among Israelis, were to change, you still have so much construction since the time you were negotiating with Mahmoud Abbas, with all the settlements in the West Bank. And that leads to Paul, his question: what can be done about the actions of the settlers in the West Bank? And I assume he's talking about some of the targeted attacks that have occurred there by Jewish settlers.
I must say that I entirely subscribe to the statement made by the American administration, the President Biden, and I think the Secretary of State, about the hilltop youth in the territories. They are provocateurs of the worst possible kind, and they should be stopped. And they should be, and the necessary measures by the Israeli government should be taken against them. Problem is that the Minister of National security in charge of taking care of this is one of them. Ben-Gvir has been convicted several times for terrorist actions against Palestinians. So do you expect someone that was convicted for terror to fight against the hilltop youth that are perpetrating all kinds of atrocities against innocent Palestinians in the territories? This is terrible. This is part of what I think creates a terrible impression that affects the public opinion in countries which we are friends with. What worries me is not the public opinion in China, okay, or in Malaysia. Public opinion in the United States of America, the friendliest state to the state of Israel, the country that supports Israel more than any other. A president that has been on our side in the most moving and exciting manner in the last half a year. We are losing the public opinion in your country.
Well,
Because-
and with that in mind, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're so tight on time, though. Alta and many other viewers want to know, what do you advise American Jews who love Israel but can't support Prime Minister Netanyahu or the far right or ultra-Orthodox parties? What do you think that American Jews who love Israel but are critical of its government can do to help?
They should do what Chuck Schumer did. Spell it out. Say it. It's very important. It's very important. I know that Chuck was criticized because he spoke in the Senate. I mean, the most prominent political person, most prominent Jewish political person in America, second to the president in many ways, that he spelled it out. Yes, he did the right thing. I cheer for him because only a friend of the state of Israel and someone is so committed to the well-being of the state of Israel can say this, because this is what needs to be said. We have to change the Israeli government, and I think that if many American Jews will express this view in the clearest possible way, it will carry an enormous influence over the public opinion in Israel. And I want to say here something, because everyone says, I mean, how can someone that doesn't live in the state of Israel and so on, and so, you know, all this rhetoric that can tell the Israelis what to do and what not to do and so on and so forth. Look, from day one of the state of Israel, and I can speak, I mean, I have a memory of not 75 years, but not much less. Okay, we always came to American Jews and asked them to support us and asked them to raise funds for us and asked them to use all their political influence in America and everywhere else in order to support the state of Israel. So we can't expect someone to do everything that we ask him and not to have a right to express his opinion about what we do.
Let me interject Susan's question, and others have asked it as well. If the Israeli public demands new elections, what would that new government likely look like? Would it be another right-wing government, for example?
I doubt that it will be a right-wing. All the polls, look, I don't know. To start with, I don't know. I don't know what will happen in America in the American elections, God forbid. And I'm not sure that I can say in the safest, you know, and certainly what will happen in Israel. But on what I hear and I see and I read all the polls that are run in Israel for the last few months, almost every day, there is a dramatic change in the political balance. The present coalition of Netanyahu has at the most 44 members supporting them in the event of a new elections, as compared to 64 that they have now. So they are losing about 35% of the public support to this present coalition, which moves into the other side. So I believe that there will be a majority of centrist parties that will be able to form a government after the elections. I hope so.
We have a viewer who asks, how much of the Israeli public holds the similar view to yours about how Israel should now wind down its military action?
Not enough. I wish there were more. I don't know to say exactly in terms of numbers, figures, how many of them. I think that there is a growing number every day of people that understand, not that we don't want to fight, not that we don't need to destroy the Hamas, that on the balance, that what we can achieve in continuing the military operation at this point is not worth the cost for our interests. And this is basically what I say. I wish we could carry on forever. And I know what may be the possible consequences for this. How much we will be able to hold the support of the international community, how much we will continue to have Americans, the president, the administration, support Israel, provide Israel with its military needs, as they are doing now all the time in an admirable manner. How much longer will we be able to get the support of Great Britain, of Germany, of France, of other countries in Europe, which are showing a degree of support which was entirely unexpected in the past? And again, and what will be the fate of the hostages? We have to bring them back. So when, you can't simply answer the question if whether we want to continue the fighting, whether most of the Israelis believe that this is the right thing to do, is how we measure all this in the broader context of how we can save the hostages, how we cannot lose the support of the international community, how can we continue to build up a future of cooperation with moderate Palestinians in order to offer a political horizon that will bring forth a possible solution one day.
And are there enough moderate Palestinians? As one of our viewers points out, polls pretty consistently show that among Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank, there's a high degree of approval of Hamas. So what's to keep, even if it's not Hamas, essentially son of Hamas, another militant group, coming to authority, not just in Gaza, but potentially the West Bank?
Number one, in the West Bank, we have terror in a different mode, in a different intensity, or we do have terror and we have to deal with it. But at the same time, in the West Bank, we have security forces of the Palestinian Authority which are cooperating with the State of Israel and are surrendering terrorists to the security forces of the State of Israel on these very days. So the picture is more complex to start with. Now, if there will be, as I said again, I don't ignore the atrocities, the terror, the extremity, the radicalism, the fundamentalism which characterize many of the Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, in many parts of the West Bank. There is no doubt about it. What I say is that we have to find a way to provide a political horizon that may perhaps influence them to change their attitude. If there will not be any political horizon, how can you even expect that anyone will change his opinion or his mind or his attitude? So this is not, they are not simple answers, but there must be a courageous and determined and imaginative attempt by us, first and foremost, because it's important for us.
Prime Minister, thank you so much, sir, for being with us. That's a good note for us to end on. Ehud Olmert, thank you very much for spending this hour with us on America at a Crossroads.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and bye to all of the many who care to spend an hour listening to an old political retiree from Israel.
We appreciate it. Thank you, sir. And please support these free programs presented by the nonprofit, nonpartisan Jews United for Democracy and Justice. You can help assure the programs continue by making a tax-deductible contribution at the website JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org/donate. That's JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org/donate. This coming Wednesday at 5 Pacific, it's Washington Post columnist Jennifer Rubin in conversation with Warren Olney. The next night, Thursday, I'll be back with former Middle East peace negotiator Dennis Ross. It's the 10th in the Israel in Crisis briefings from America at a Crossroads. That's this Thursday afternoon at 5. Warren Olney with Washington Post, Jennifer Rubin, Wednesday at 5 o'clock Pacific time. From all of us at America at a Crossroads, have a very good Sunday afternoon.